The massive freighter called the Twilight Runner came to a slow stop at Nexus Station, one of the busiest trading hubs in the galaxy. But this wasn't a normal delivery. Inside the cargo hold, locked behind 3 layers of security, was something that made even the bravest station guards nervous. A Draconix hatchling. The most feared predator species in all of known space. Everyone knew the stories about the dragons. How they'd torn through 17 human colonies like they were nothing. How entire fleets had been sent just to push them back to the edge of the galaxy. How they showed no mercy, no fear, and definitely no hesitation when it came to killing. After years of war, humanity and their allies had finally managed to hunt the species down to almost nothing. But that didn't make the survivors any less dangerous. Dr. Anderson stood in the cargo bay, checking his tablet for the 5th time that hour. He was a human xenobiologist, which meant studying alien creatures was literally his job. But even he felt uneasy around this one. The hatchling was only a few days old, barely the size of a regular house cat, but it already had that look in its eyes. That cold, calculating stare that said it was sizing up everything around it as either a threat or a meal. Its scales were pitch black, so dark they seemed to swallow up the light from the overhead panels. When it screeched, which it did constantly, the sound cut right through you. Several of the security officers had already requested transfers off this assignment. Nobody wanted to be anywhere near the thing. The plan was simple enough. Transport the hatchling to a maximum security research facility where scientists could study it. Maybe figure out what made these creatures tick. Maybe find a weakness in case more of them showed up someday. Dr. Anderson didn't love the idea of keeping such a dangerous animal alive, but orders were orders. On the other side of the station, in the civilian docking area, Derek Hayes was having the worst day of his life. He and his 6-year-old daughter Katie were supposed to catch a transport ship to the outer colonies where his new job was waiting. But some computer glitch had canceled their booking, and now they were stuck on Nexus Station overnight with nowhere to go. Derek stood at the dockmaster's window, trying to keep his voice calm even though he wanted to scream. Katie tugged on his sleeve. She was bored. The station was loud and crowded and she'd already asked him 17 times when they could leave. "Just stay right here, okay, sweetie?" Derek said, still arguing with the dockmaster about their tickets. "Don't wander off." But Katie was 6 years old and 6-year-olds don't really do staying still. She spotted a hallway that looked interesting. It had blinking lights and was quieter than the main corridor. Before her dad could notice, she slipped away to explore. The hallway led to another hallway, which led to some stairs, which led to a maintenance corridor that definitely wasn't meant for passengers. Katie didn't know that though. She just thought it was an adventure. The metal walls hummed with machinery sounds, and she could hear people talking somewhere up ahead. She followed the voices until she found herself standing outside a huge room with guards posted at the door. They were turned away from her, focused on something inside, talking nervously about protocol and transport schedules. Katie was small. She squeezed past them without anyone noticing. The cargo bay was enormous and mostly empty except for one thing in the center. A reinforced containment unit made of super thick glass and metal. And inside that unit was something Katie had never seen before. It looked like a tiny dragon from the storybooks her dad read to her at bedtime. Black scales that shimmered in the light. Small wings that were folded against its body. A long tail that whipped back and forth angrily. The creature was strapped down with restraints that looked way too big for something so small, and it was fighting against them with everything it had. Katie walked closer, pressing her small hands against the cold glass. The creature was making these awful screeching sounds, thrashing around like it was terrified. And maybe it was. It was all alone in there. No mom, no dad, no friends. Just restraints and bright lights and strange people staring at it. The little dragon suddenly stopped moving. Its head turned toward Katie, those bright eyes locking onto her face. For a moment, neither of them moved. Katie tilted her head, studying the creature with pure childhood curiosity. No fear at all. Just wonder. Then she smiled, bright and genuine, the way only kids can smile. "Oh, you're so cute," she said softly, her voice full of pure delight. The hatchling went completely still. Its tail stopped thrashing. Its wings relaxed slightly. It stared at Katie like it had never seen anything quite like her before. Which honestly it probably hadn't. For the first time since being captured, the most dangerous predator in the galaxy acted like something other than a monster. It acted curious. The security alarm went off exactly 4 minutes after Katie disappeared from the passenger area. Derek's heart nearly stopped when he realized his daughter was gone. Station security pulled up camera footage and found her within minutes, but what they saw on the monitors made absolutely no sense. Katie was sitting cross-legged on the floor outside the containment unit, humming some nursery rhyme she'd learned in school. And the dragon hatchling, the creature that had been screaming and thrashing nonstop for 2 days straight, was just watching her. No aggression. No hunting behavior. Just pure, intense curiosity, like it had never seen anything quite so interesting in its entire short life. Dr. Anderson sprinted to the cargo bay, expecting to find a nightmare. Instead, he found a little girl swinging her legs and smiling at a dragon that was pressed against the glass, tracking her every movement like a cat watching a bird. Except there was no hunger in those eyes. Just fascination. "This is impossible," Dr. Anderson whispered, pulling up data on his tablet with shaking hands. "Draconics are hardwired by evolution to attack anything that moves. It's not a choice. It's biology. They don't have a friendly bone in their entire body." But the evidence was right in front of him. The hatchling wasn't acting like a predator at all. Commander Stevens, the head of station security, wanted Katie removed immediately. Get her away from that thing before it decided to act like the killer it was bred to be. But Dr. Anderson hesitated. As a scientist, he was looking at something that should be impossible. If this hatchling was responding differently to a human child, there had to be a reason. And that reason could change everything they thought they knew about these creatures. He made a decision that went against every safety protocol in the book. "I want to try supervised contact," he said. Commander Stevens looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "You want to put a child in a cage with that thing? Are you insane?" "I'll take full responsibility," Dr. Anderson said, though his hands were sweating. "But we have to understand what's happening here." Derek arrived right as they were arguing, out of breath from running through half the station. When he saw his daughter sitting there, perfectly safe and happy, the relief almost knocked him over. But then they explained what they wanted to do, and the relief turned into pure terror. "Absolutely not," Derek said. "You're not putting my daughter anywhere near that monster." Katie looked up at him with those big innocent eyes. "But Daddy, he's not a monster. He's just scared and lonely. Like I was when we moved away from Grandma's house." Something about the way she said it made everyone pause. Dr. Anderson knelt down next to Katie. "Sweetheart, do you really think you could go in there safely?" She nodded without any hesitation. "He won't hurt me. I can tell." They set up every safety precaution possible. Armed guards on standby. Emergency barriers ready to drop. Dr. Anderson wore full protective gear and went in first, watching the hatchling's reaction. It barely glanced at him. But when Katie stepped through the containment door, the little dragon's entire body language changed. It approached slowly, carefully, like it was afraid of scaring her away. Katie held out her hand the same way she'd pet the neighbor's dog back home. The hatchling sniffed her fingers, then gently pressed its scaled head against her palm. The people watching through the glass couldn't believe what they were seeing. "His name is Spark," Katie announced like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "He told me." Over the next 3 days, while Derek frantically tried every possible way to get them off the station and away from this insanity, something remarkable happened. Katie spent hours with Spark. She brought him picture books and read stories about heroes and adventures. She played simple games with him, teaching him to recognize patterns and respond to her voice. The hatchling, who by all scientific understanding should have been developing into a mindless killing machine, started acting like a pet. He mimicked the way Katie tilted her head when she was thinking. He followed her around the containment area like a puppy following its owner. When she laughed, he made this soft chirping sound that almost seemed like he was trying to laugh too. It was wrong. It defied everything science knew about these creatures. But it was happening. Word spread fast. Aliens from dozens of different species came to watch through the observation windows, trying to understand what they were seeing. The same humans who had lost everything to Draconics attacks. The military commanders who had fought in the Dragon Wars. They all stood there watching a 6-year-old girl play with their greatest enemy, and nobody knew what to make of it. Dr. Anderson worked around the clock, running tests and analyzing data. Finally, he found the answer. Draconics hatchlings went through something called critical imprinting in their first few weeks of life. In the wild, they'd bond with their clutch mates and learn hunting behaviors from adult dragons. But Spark hadn't been near any other dragons. He'd been alone and terrified until Katie showed up. And now he'd imprinted on her instead. The implications were staggering. If dragons could be influenced during this critical period, if they could bond with other species instead of their own kind, then maybe they weren't the unstoppable monsters everyone thought they were. But not everyone saw it that way. News reached the Galactic Council, the governing body that made decisions for all the allied species. They called an emergency session to debate what should be done about Spark. Many of the council members had lost people to dragon attacks. The wounds were still fresh, the anger still raw. The debate lasted for hours, but the outcome was predictable. Too many people remembered the colonies that had been destroyed. Too many had buried friends and family. They weren't willing to take any chances, no matter how remarkable this situation seemed. The vote came back unanimous. Immediate termination. No exceptions. Katie didn't understand politics or councils or votes. But she understood that something was wrong because Spark had stopped eating and his beautiful black scales were losing their shine. When Dr. Anderson had to tell her the truth, she looked at him with tears in her eyes and said something that broke his heart. But he needs me. And I need him too. Katie noticed the change in Spark before anyone else did. He started refusing the food that Dr. Anderson brought him. The scientists had figured out exactly what young dragons needed to eat, but Spark would just look at it and turn away. His movements became slower, less energetic. The beautiful black scales that used to shimmer under the lights started looking dull and lifeless, like someone had painted over them with gray. What's wrong with him? Katie asked Dr. Anderson one afternoon, pressing her hand against the glass of the containment unit. Spark dragged himself over to match his head with where her palm was, but even that simple movement seemed to exhaust him. Dr. Anderson had been dreading this conversation. He knelt down next to Katie, trying to find words that would make sense to a 6-year-old without completely breaking her heart. But there really wasn't a gentle way to say it. Katie, the people who make the big decisions, they're worried about what might happen when Spark grows up. They think he might become dangerous. Katie's eyes went wide. But he won't. He's good. Can't you tell them that? I tried, sweetie. A lot of people tried. But they've already decided. Dr. Anderson felt his throat tighten. They're taking him away tomorrow morning. I'm so sorry. Katie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. They're going to hurt him, aren't they? The doctor couldn't lie to her. He just nodded. But he needs me, Katie said, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. And I need him too. He's my best friend. Dr. Anderson pulled her into a hug while she cried. Inside the containment unit, Spark made a low, mournful sound that none of them had heard before. Like he understood exactly what was happening. That night, Katie couldn't sleep. Derek had taken her back to their temporary quarters, but she kept thinking about Spark all alone in that cargo bay, knowing somehow that something terrible was coming. She wondered if dragons could feel scared the same way humans did. She was pretty sure they could. At exactly 2 a.m, every alarm on Nexus Station started screaming at once. The sound was deafening, echoing through every corridor and chamber. Red emergency lights flooded the halls. Derek jumped out of bed and grabbed Katie, his military training kicking in automatically. Something was very, very wrong. Commander Stevens' voice came over the station-wide intercom, and even through the speakers you could hear the panic. Hull breach in sectors 7 through 12. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. But it wasn't a mechanical failure or an asteroid strike. 3 adult Draconics had somehow found Nexus Station, and they'd torn through the outer hull like it was made of paper. These weren't hatchlings. These were full-grown dragons, each one the size of a small spacecraft, covered in scars from countless battles. And they were heading straight for the cargo bay where Spark was being held. The station's security teams opened fire with everything they had. Energy weapons, projectile cannons, electromagnetic pulses. Nothing worked. The dragon scales were too thick, too dense. The few shots that actually hit them just seemed to make them angry. They swept through the corridors, crushing anyone who got in their way, following some instinct that led them directly to the hatchling. Scientists later figured out that Spark had been releasing distress signals, chemical markers that adult dragons could detect across incredible distances. He'd been calling for help, and somehow, against all odds, someone had answered. Evacuation protocols started automatically. Families rushed toward escape pods. Military personnel tried to buy time for the civilians to get away. But everyone knew the truth. There wasn't enough time. Those dragons would reach the cargo bay in minutes, and when they did, they'd tear the entire station apart. Derek ran through the chaos, carrying Katie and trying to reach an evacuation point. But Katie saw signs pointing toward the cargo bay and she knew Spark was there, probably more terrified than he'd ever been in his entire life. She couldn't leave him. She just couldn't. "Daddy, put me down," she screamed, fighting against his grip. "Katie, no. We have to get to safety. Spark needs me. He's scared. I have to help him." She twisted free with that surprising strength that kids somehow find in desperate moments and took off running toward the cargo bay. Derek shouted after her, chasing her through corridors that were starting to buckle and tear as the dragons got closer. They reached the cargo bay just as the adult dragons smashed through the main entrance. The reinforced doors that were supposed to withstand anything just crumpled like aluminum foil. Debris rained down everywhere. Emergency lights flickered and died, leaving everything bathed in eerie red backup lighting. The lead dragon was massive, a female covered in white scars that told stories of 100 fights. Her eyes locked onto the containment unit where Spark was trapped. She moved forward with terrifying purpose, seeing the humans as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. One swipe of her tail sent 3 security guards flying across the room. But then something happened that stopped everyone cold. Spark, tiny compared to the adult dragons, positioned himself between Katie and the incoming threat. He spread his small wings as wide as they'd go, which wasn't very wide at all, and hissed with everything he had. The sound was pathetic compared to the roars of the adults, but the message was crystal clear. This human was his. And he would protect her even if it killed him. The adult dragons had never seen anything like it. Hatchlings didn't protect prey. They definitely didn't challenge adults. The female dragon paused, her massive head tilting to the side, trying to understand what she was seeing. The massive female dragon stood frozen in the destroyed cargo bay, her head tilted at an angle that looked almost confused. In all her years of existence, through countless hunts and battles, she'd never witnessed anything like this. Hatchlings didn't defend other creatures. They especially didn't stand up to fully grown adults. It went against every natural instinct their species had. The 2 other dragons flanking her looked equally puzzled. They shifted their weight, uncertain, waiting for the lead female to make sense of this situation. The hatchling was still there, wings spread, placing his tiny body between them and the human child. He was shaking. Probably terrified out of his mind. But he didn't move. Katie's whole body was trembling too, but she stepped forward anyway, moving to stand right beside Spark. She spread her arms out wide, making herself as big as possible, which wasn't very big at all considering she was only 6 years old and barely came up to her dad's waist. But she stood there anyway, staring up at creatures that could swallow her whole without even trying. "He's my friend," Katie said, her voice shaking but clear. "You can't have him." Derek wanted to grab his daughter and run, but his feet wouldn't move. He'd fought in combat situations before, faced down enemies with weapons pointed at his head, but nothing had ever scared him like watching his little girl stand in front of a dragon. Every parent instinct in his body was screaming at him to do something, but he knew if he moved suddenly, it might trigger an attack. From the security office 3 levels up, Dr. Anderson watched everything unfold on the video feeds, his fingers flying across his tablet. He'd rigged sensors throughout the cargo bay that could detect chemical signals, the pheromones that dragons use to communicate with each other. His screen was lighting up like crazy with data, showing complex patterns passing between the adult dragons and little Spark. "Oh my God," Dr. Anderson whispered, finally understanding what he was seeing. "They recognize it. They know something's changed." Commander Stevens stood beside him, one hand hovering over the station's weapon systems. "What do you mean? Changed how?" "The hatchling isn't operating on predatory instinct anymore," Dr. Anderson explained rapidly, his eyes glued to the data. "He's showing loyalty. Protective behavior. The adults have never seen that in a hatchling before. They don't know what to make of it." Back in the cargo bay, the lead female took a slow step forward. Katie wanted to run so badly. Every human survival instinct told her to get away from the thing with teeth the size of her arm. But Spark needed her to be brave, so she stayed put. The dragon lowered her massive head, bringing one enormous eye level with Katie. The eye was bigger than Katie's whole head, with a vertical pupil that contracted as it focused on her. The dragon sniffed, her nostrils flaring as she took in Katie's scent. Then she shifted to sniff Spark, going back and forth between them several times. Katie could feel the dragon's breath washing over her, hot and smelling like smoke and something sharp she couldn't identify. She kept her arms spread, kept herself between the dragon and Spark, even though her legs felt like jelly. The female dragon pulled back slightly, and something in her posture changed. The aggressive tension seemed to drain out of her body. She made a sound, low and rumbling, that vibrated through the entire cargo bay. But it wasn't a roar or a threat. It sounded almost like acknowledgement, like she was agreeing to something. "Is she backing down?" Commander Stevens asked, unable to believe what he was seeing on the monitors. "I think so," Dr. Anderson breathed. "I think she's accepting this." The female dragon took a step backward, then another. She made a series of clicks and rumbles to the other 2 dragons, and they began backing away too. The station's automated weapons powered up, tracking systems locking onto the dragons, ready to fire the moment they showed aggression. But Commander Stevens held off on the order. Something told him that attacking now would be the worst possible mistake. Before the dragons left through the massive hole they'd torn in the station hull, the female did something remarkable. She released a complex series of chemical signals, pheromones that Spark absorbed like he was breathing them in. The pattern was intricate, layered with meaning that Dr. Anderson would spend months trying to fully decode. But even in that moment, watching his sensors go wild, Dr. Anderson got the basic message. It was something like, "Protect your bond. We remember this kindness." The three adult dragons launched themselves back into space, their massive forms silhouetting against the stars before they vanished into the darkness. The cargo bay fell silent except for the sound of alarms still wailing in the distance and the hiss of air escaping through the breach. Derek finally unfroze and rushed to Katie, scooping her up and checking her for injuries even though she kept saying she was fine. Spark collapsed, exhausted from fear and adrenaline, making small chirping sounds. Katie reached out to touch his head, and he pressed against her hand like always. Within hours, every news network in the galaxy had the footage. A 6-year-old human girl standing up to the most feared predators in known space. A dragon hatchling choosing to protect instead of attack. Adult dragons walking away peacefully from a situation that should have ended in slaughter. The footage played on loop across thousands of worlds. Humans watched it. Aliens from hundreds of different species watched it. People who had lost everything to dragon attacks watched it. And nobody could quite believe what they were seeing. The impossible had happened. And the galaxy would never be the same. The video footage spread like wildfire across every corner of known space. Within 24 hours, every major news network was running the story. A human child, barely tall enough to reach a kitchen counter, standing fearlessly in front of 3 adult dragons. A tiny hatchling positioning himself as her protector. Ancient predators backing down and leaving peacefully instead of destroying everything in their path. People couldn't stop watching it. They played it over and over, trying to understand what they were seeing. Some called it a miracle. Others called it proof that humans were absolutely insane. But everyone agreed on one thing: nothing like this had ever happened before. The Galactic Council held an emergency session within 48 hours of the incident. The same council members who had voted unanimously for Spark's execution now found themselves facing something they hadn't anticipated. Public opinion had shifted dramatically. Billions of people across hundreds of worlds had watched that footage. They'd seen a child's courage and a monster's choice to protect instead of destroy. The execution order was reversed. Spark would live, but under strict human supervision and monitoring. It was the compromise nobody loved but everyone could accept. Derek found himself sitting in a government office, completely overwhelmed by what was happening. Officers and scientists kept using words like unprecedented and historic opportunity. All he could think about was keeping his daughter safe. But when he looked at Katie sitting on the floor playing with Spark like he was a normal pet, he couldn't deny what he was seeing. The bond between them was real. "Mr. Hayes," Dr. Anderson said gently, "I know this is a lot. But Katie and Spark together, what they represent, it could change everything. We're asking you to be part of a cross-species integration program. It would mean living at a research facility, letting us study how their bond develops, seeing if what happened here can be replicated." Derek wanted to say no. He wanted to take his daughter far away from all of this and go back to living a normal, quiet life. But he looked at Katie again, saw how happy she was, and realized that ship had sailed the moment she'd pressed her hands against that containment glass. "Okay," he heard himself say. "We'll do it." 3 weeks later, the Hayes family moved to a specialized facility on New Terra, a peaceful world with wide open spaces and strict security protocols. The facility was part research center, part home, designed to give Katie and Spark room to grow while scientists observed and documented everything. The first few months were an adjustment. Derek had to get used to living with a dragon, which wasn't something any parenting book had prepared him for. But watching Katie and Spark together made it worthwhile. They grew up side by side, learning from each other in ways that fascinated everyone studying them. Spark developed far beyond what any normal dragon should be capable of. He started understanding human language, not just responding to commands but actually comprehending conversations. When Katie was sad, he'd curl up next to her and make soft, comforting sounds. When she laughed, he'd do that chirping thing that sounded almost like laughter too. He learned to control his natural hunting instincts, to be gentle even when he was excited. By Katie's 7th birthday, Spark was the size of a large dog, his scales gleaming healthy black again, his wings strong enough to carry him short distances. But the most remarkable change wasn't physical. It was in his eyes. Where once there had been only predatory calculation, now there was genuine emotion, affection, loyalty, something that looked an awful lot like love. Then something even more remarkable started happening. Other dragons began appearing near human colonies, but not to attack. They approached cautiously, almost curiously, like they were looking for something. Dr. Anderson's research team figured out they were seeking the bondmakers, the humans who had somehow changed one of their kind. Not every encounter went smoothly. There were still incidents, still conflicts. Dragons were still dangerous, and fear on both sides ran deep. But a door had been opened. Where once there had been only war, now there was the possibility of something else. Communication. Understanding. Maybe even peace. On the morning of Katie's 7th birthday, she woke up to find Spark had made her something. He'd spent weeks gathering soft materials, blankets, cushions, strips of fabric, and woven them together into a nest-like structure. It was clumsy and uneven, clearly made by someone without hands, but it was perfect. It looked just like the blanket fort Katie had built for him back on Nexus Station, when he'd been small and scared and alone. Katie threw her arms around his neck and cried happy tears. Spark wrapped his wings around her carefully, making that rumbling sound that meant contentment. Dr. Anderson made his final log entry that evening, watching them play in the garden while Derek supervised nervously from the porch. "I've spent my whole career studying alien species," he recorded. "I thought I understood what made humans special. Our technology, our adaptability, our stubborn refusal to give up. But I was wrong. What makes humanity truly remarkable is simpler and more powerful than any of that." He watched Katie chase Spark through the grass, both of them making joyful sounds that transcended species. It's our dangerous, beautiful tendency to see potential friends where everyone else sees monsters. A 6-year-old girl looked at the most feared creature in the galaxy and saw something cute, something worth protecting. And in doing so, she didn't just save one life. She showed us all a path forward we never knew existed. Katie had never understood what all the fuss was about. To her, it was simple. Spark was cute. He was hers. She was his. That's all that mattered. Sometimes, the most powerful force in the entire universe is a child's unconditional love.